That's not just a headline. That's what really happened. To me. One morning, my door unlocked by itself. I froze, coffee in my hand. Because no one had a key. And then, she stepped inside. Karen, the HOA president, with papers in her hand and madness in her eyes. She told me, my house, my living room, was community property. That's when my K9s moved, and what happened next made the entire neighborhood scream, "Welcome back to Mad HOA, where the suburbs look perfect." But behind the fences, chaos rules. My name is Daniel. I'm a single guy living in a quiet cul-de-sac in Virginia. I work mornings as a firefighter, and evenings with my 2 K9 partners, Max and Rex. Life was simple, until the HOA turned it upside down. And this story begins with the day Karen broke into my home. She was standing in my doorway, barefoot in a messy robe, clutching HOA papers like they were a weapon. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood, the woman who smiled at block parties but left nasty notes on cars, the same woman who once fined my neighbor $200 because his grass was half an inch too tall, and now she was inside my house. I didn't invite her. I didn't even hear the door unlock. She just walked in, like she owned the place. Her eyes scanned my living room, slow, sharp, like a hawk circling its prey. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't just rude, this was insane. She held up the stack of papers and said, "Daniel, this is community property. I have the right to inspect it. Community property. My living room, with my dog's toys on the floor, my pictures on the wall, my boots by the door." I laughed. At first, I thought maybe she was joking or confused. But her face didn't change. She was dead serious. Max and Rex, my 2 K9 partners. They were already on edge. Rex stood tall. "Hi." His teeth flashing in the light from the open door, Max growled low, deep from his chest, the kind of growl that makes your bones rattle. But Karen didn't flinch. She stepped forward, bold, like she was daring them to move. Her slippers scraped against my wooden floor, and I swear, I felt my blood pressure rise with every step. "Your dogs are not approved," she snapped. "Your furniture is not approved. Your curtains are not approved. Nothing in here is compliant with HOA code." I blinked. I couldn't even believe what I was hearing. Curtains, furniture, dogs. She wasn't talking about my lawn or mailbox anymore. She was talking about my life. I put my coffee cup down, slowly, careful not to make a sudden move that might set her off. And I said, "Karen, you're trespassing. You need to leave." But Karen only smirked. "I can't trespass on community property," she said. "This house belongs to all of us." My jaw clenched. The absurdity of it burned through me. I worked for years to buy this house. I pulled extra shifts at the firehouse. I trained Max and Rex from puppies. This was my home, not hers, not anyone else's. And yet here she was, standing in my living room, calling it hers. The silence stretched. Max barked once, sharp, like a warning shot. Karen jolted, but she didn't stop. She waved her papers again, like they gave her power, like a stack of bylaws was stronger than 2 trained K9s ready to protect their owner. Her voice rose, shrill and cracked. "You think these animals make you special? You think this house makes you free? No. The HOA owns this street. The HOA owns you." And in that moment, I saw something in her eyes. Not just control, not just arrogance, but obsession. The kind that can't be reasoned with. I felt the hairs rise on the back of my neck. Max growled louder. Rex lowered his head, ready to charge if I gave the signal. Karen took another step, and I realized she wasn't going. To stop, I lifted my hand, calm, steady, and whispered one word to my dogs. "Wait." They froze, perfectly still, their eyes never leaving her, their muscles tight like coiled springs. I had control. But just barely. One wrong move, and chaos would erupt. Karen tilted her head, like she was studying me. Then she smiled. That same cold smile I'd seen 100 times before, at HOA meetings, when she fined people, when she humiliated neighbors. But this time, She was in my world. Not the HOA boardroom, not the neighborhood newsletter. She was in my house, and she was outnumbered. Still, she didn't back down. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You can't hide behind your dogs forever, Daniel. The HOA will always win." The words hung heavy in the air, like a curse, like a threat, and before I could respond, Max barked again, loud, sharp, so powerful it shook the frame of the door. Karen jumped. Her papers slipped from her hand and fluttered to the floor like dead leaves, her face twisted in fear. But she still tried to stand tall, still tried to keep her dignity. But my K9s weren't buying it. Rex growled so deep the walls seemed to vibrate. Max stepped forward, slow, deliberate, like a soldier moving into position. Karen stumbled back, her robe caught on the doorframe. Her glasses slid down her nose for the first time. The HOA queen looked small, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. Years of her bullying, years of her fines, years of her threats, all crumbling in one moment, all exposed by the sound of two loyal dogs protecting their home. Karen gasped, spun around, and ran out the door, her papers scattered across the lawn, her slippers slapping the pavement as she fled. And Rex, they followed her to the porch, barking so loud the whole neighborhood heard. Neighbors peeked out from behind blinds, curtains twitched, and for once, everyone saw Karen for what she really was. Not a leader, not a protector, but a trespasser, a coward in a robe, running from the very rules she tried to enforce. I stood at the door, watching her disappear down the K9s street, and I wondered, would this finally be the end of her reign? Or was this only the beginning of something even darker? The street was silent after she ran. Only the sound of my dog's barking echoed through the cul-de-sac. Max's chest rose and fell like a drum. Rex paced the porch, his eyes locked on the street where Karen disappeared. I stood there, coffee forgotten, hands shaking. Not from fear, but from the shock of what just happened. Karen had actually broken into my house. She stood in my living room. She told me my own home was community property, and she only left because my dogs chased her out. It sounded insane, but in my neighborhood, insanity was just another day. I bent down and picked up the papers she dropped. They were covered in highlighted lines and angry notes in the margins. HOA rules, bylaws, restrictions, things about fence height, trash bins, paint colors. But none of it, not a single word, said anything about barging into someone's home. Her handwriting crawled across the pages like a spider, words underlined 3 times. Non-compliant. Violation. Removal required. She had circled the word community again and again, until the ink bled through. I felt my stomach turn. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was personal. Max brushed against my leg. Rex nudged my hand with his nose. I scratched behind their ears and whispered, "Good boys." But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen never backed down. If she couldn't control me with rules, she'd find another way. Later that day, I went outside to get the mail. And that's when I noticed the neighbors. They were watching, from behind curtains, from porches, from car windows parked along the curb. They had seen her. They had heard her scream, and they were whispering about it now. Little murmurs that floated across the perfect lawns like smoke. Mrs. Williams across the street gave me a small nod. Mr. Patel from 2. He corner waved, his smile half hidden like he knew something. Even kids on bikes slowed down to stare at me, wide-eyed, like I had become some kind of hero in a story they'd tell their friends. But not everyone smiled. I saw Mr. Green, the HOA treasurer, standing on his driveway with arms crossed. His face was hard, his eyes colder than I'd ever seen, and I knew. Word had already spread. That night I sat at my kitchen table with Max and Rex curled at my feet. The house felt quiet, too quiet. Like the calm before a storm, I thought about moving, about packing my things and leaving this place behind. But then I remembered why I bought this house in the first place. It wasn't just a house, it was freedom, it was safety for my dogs. It was mine, and I wasn't going to let Karen take it away. The next morning, a letter was taped to my door. Not mailed, not delivered, taped. By hand. The handwriting was perfect. Sharp. Each letter like it had been carved with a knife. It said, "Immediate hearing required. Board will review your non-compliance. My jaw tightened. There it was. The next move. She couldn't break me with fear, so she would try to break me with paperwork. I walked back inside, ripped the letter in half, and dropped it in the trash. Max tilted his head at me, like he could feel my anger. Rex growled at the sound of the paper tearing. I patted their heads and said, "Don't worry. We're not going anywhere." But the truth was, I worried. Because when Karen wanted war, she always got it. That week, strange things started happening. My trash bins were moved to the wrong side of the driveway. My mailbox was stuffed with anonymous flyers about dangerous dogs in the neighborhood. One night, I even heard footsteps outside my window. But when I opened the blinds, no one was there. It was psychological warfare. Notes, whispers, shadows. The kind of tricks that wear you down one day at a time. And yet, every morning, I still walked my dogs. Every evening, I still sat on my porch with my coffee because I knew if I showed fear, she'd win. The turning point came on a Friday afternoon. I was grilling in the backyard when I heard voices near my fence, low, hushed, but angry. I walked closer. Max and Rex followed at my heels, and I heard it. Karen's voice, sharp, venomous. "He thinks his dogs can scare me. He thinks he's untouchable. But I'll show him. I'll show everyone." Then another voice, Mr. Green, calm, steady, like a snake in the grass. "We'll hit him with fines, hearings, violations, until he breaks. No one can stand against the board forever." I froze, my hands clenched into fists. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't in my head. They were plotting against me. I looked down at Max and Rex. Their ears were perked, their eyes locked on the fence. They knew too. They could feel the threat just like I could for the first time. I felt something stronger than fear. I felt resolve. If Karen wanted a fight, I'd give her one. If she wanted to play games with rules, I'd learn every rule better than she ever did. And if she thought she could step foot in my house again, well, Max and Rex were waiting. That night I didn't sleep much. I sat at my table, going through every paper she left behind. I read every bylaw, every clause, every ridiculous restriction, and I realized something. The HOA loved rules, but rules could be used both ways. And if I played smart, maybe I could turn her own weapon against her. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was going to fight Karen on her own battlefield. But I wasn't alone. I had Max. I had Rex. And I had the truth. As I poured my coffee and scratched behind their ears, I couldn't help but smile. Because deep down, I knew one thing. Karen thought she was the hunter, but she had no idea. She had just become the prey. The letter came 2 days later. This time, it wasn't taped to my door. It came in a stiff white envelope with the HOA seal stamped in red. I opened it slowly, even though I already knew what it would say. "You are requo. I read to attend a compliance hearing before the HOA board." The date was set for Saturday morning. The place, the community clubhouse, the same clubhouse where Karen had humiliated neighbors for years, where people sat in folding chairs, nodding at every ridiculous rule she barked out, where fear lived behind polite smiles. I folded the letter in half. Max growled as I dropped it on the counter. Rex nosed at my hand, as if asking if I was all right. I wasn't, but I had made a promise. I wasn't running anymore. The day of the hearing, the clubhouse looked like a courtroom. Plastic tables in a row, 5 board members seated in front, and Karen in the middle, her robe replaced with a stiff blazer, her glasses perched on her nose like a judge ready to hand down a sentence. Neighbors sat in folding chairs behind me. Some looked curious, some looked nervous. A few whispered as I walked in with Max and Rex at my side. Karen's smile stretched across her face like a mask. But her eyes burned with something darker, something that told me this wasn't just about rules, this was about control. She slammed a gavel against the table, a cheap wooden gavel she must have bought online. The sound cracked through the room. "Order," she barked. "As president of this HOA, I call this hearing to review Daniel's violations." Her voice echoed in the small room. She listed infractions one by one. Unapproved window curtains, non-compliant mailbox design, unauthorized K9 animals on the property. Each word dripped with venom, each accusation more ridiculous than the last. My neighbors shifted in their seats. Some hid smirks, some shook their heads, but no one spoke up. Finally, she looked at me. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" I took a deep breath. I stood tall, and I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I said, "Yes, I do." I pulled a folder from under my arm, the same papers she had dropped in my living room. Her notes, her handwriting, her obsession. I spread them on the table, every line, every highlight, every scribble that proved she had twisted the rules into something unrecognizable. I point. And to the word community circled over and over. I read her own notes out loud. Daniel's furniture, non-compliant. Daniel's dogs, illegal. Community property, inspect immediately. Murmurs rippled through the room. Faces turned toward Karen. Her smile faltered. I leaned forward. "And I remind this board, nothing in your bylaws gives you the right to enter my home. Nothing gives you the right to call my living room community property. Nothing gives you the right to trespass." Karen's face turned red. She slammed the gavel again. "Enough!" she shouted. "You're twisting my words." But it was too late. The whispers grew louder. People exchanged looks for once. They weren't afraid. The treasurer, Mr. Green, cleared his throat. He leaned into his microphone and said, "We're not here to discuss trespassing. We're here to discuss your compliance issues." His voice was calm, smooth, like poison wrapped in silk. He wanted to shift the spotlight away from Karen. He wanted to drag me back into their trap, but I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You want to talk about compliance? Then let's talk about your own rules." I opened another page in the bylaws, highlighted lines I had memorized over sleepless nights, clauses about privacy, property rights, homeowners' protections. I read them out loud, each line like a stone thrown against their glass walls, each word cutting deeper into their game. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Even the kids in the back stopped whispering. All eyes were on Karen and Mr. Green, and for the first time, they looked cornered. But Karen wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Her voice dropped low, almost a hiss. "You think this is over, Daniel? You think you can embarrass me in front of my board? This is just the beginning." Her words sent a chill through the room, but I didn't let it show. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms, and smiled, because deep down, I knew the tide was turning. After the hearing, I walked out of the clubhouse with Max and Rex at my side. The sun hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. Neighbors whispered as I passed. Mrs. Williams touched my arm and said quietly, "Good job, Daniel." It's about time someone stood up to her. Even Mr. Patel gave me a thumbs up as he walked by, but not everyone was pleased. Mr. Green stood by the clubhouse door. His eyes locked on me, cold, calculating, like a man who had just lost a battle but was already planning the next war. I knew he was dangerous, maybe more dangerous than Karen, because he didn't scream, he didn't lose control. He waited, and men who wait are the ones you really have to watch. That night I couldn't sleep again. I sat at the table with my dogs by my side. The house creaked in the dark. Every shadow felt heavier. Every sound outside made me tense. I thought about Karen's face when I read her notes out loud. The fury, the fear, the obsession. And I realized she wasn't going to stop. She couldn't. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about her power, and she would fight until she had it back. But then I thought about the neighbors who nodded, the ones who whispered, the ones who secretly hated her but never dared to say it out loud. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this fight. The next morning I found something strange on my porch. Another letter, but this one wasn't from the HOA. It was handwritten on plain-lined paper. No seal, no official stamp. It said, "We're tired of her too, but we can't fight her alone. Meet us tomorrow night." There was no signature, just an address at the far end of the cul-de-sac. I stared at the paper for a long time. My dogs nudged my hands, as if asking if I would go, and my heart pounded with a mix of fear and hope, because maybe, just maybe, the neighborhood was ready to fight back. The note sat heavy in my hand. Plain paper, no signature, just an address. The far end of the cul-de-sac. The house that always looked too quiet. I didn't know if it was a trap. I didn't know if I was walking into another game Karen had set for me. But I did know one thing. I couldn't ignore it. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Max snored softly at the foot of my bed. Rex's ears twitched every time a car passed outside, and I thought about the words again and again. We're tired of her too, but we can't fight her alone. Meet us tomorrow night. By morning, I had made my decision. The next evening, I walked down the cul-de-sac. The air was thick with the smell of cut grass and barbecue. Sprinklers ticked softly in the distance. Every house looked perfect. But behind those perfect shutters and manicured lawns, secrets lived. I stopped at the address written on the paper, a small beige house with trimmed hedges and a flickering porch light. For years, I had barely noticed it. Now it looked like the most important place in the world. I knocked. The door opened a crack. 2 nervous eyes peered out, then it opened wider. It was Mrs. Williams, the kind woman who lived across the street. Her face looked tired, but her eyes burned with something I hadn't seen before: determination. "Come in," she whispered. Inside, the living room was dim, the curtains drawn tight. 3 neighbors sat in a circle of folding chairs. Mr. Patel, Mr. Lewis from down the block, and even quiet Mrs. Lee, who rarely spoke at all. They all looked up at me as I stepped in. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken tension. Mrs. Williams closed the door and said softly, "We can't keep living like this. Karen has gone too far." Mr. Patel leaned forward. "She fined me for a bird feeder last month. Said it was attracting wildlife. It was just a couple of sparrows." Mr. Lewis shook his head. "She made me paint my garage door 3 times. 3, because the color wasn't exactly what she wanted." And Mrs. Lee's voice cracked as she whispered, "She told me my son couldn't park in front of our own house because his car was unsightly." Their voices overlapped. Stories spilled out like broken glass: fines, threats, humiliation. It was all the same pattern: Karen, using the HOA like a weapon, to control everyone. Finally, Mrs. Williams turned to me. "And now, she's inside your house." The room went silent, all eyes on me. I nodded slowly. "Yes, and that's why I'm here." I told them everything, about the break-in, about the hearing, about the papers she dropped on my floor. I told them how she circled the word community again and again, how she said my living room belonged to her, how she tried to make my dogs illegal. Their faces hardened with every word. Mr. Patel clenched his fists. Mrs. Lee shook her head in disbelief, and Mr. Lewis muttered, "She's lost her mind." Finally, Mrs. Williams spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "We've had enough, and it's time to fight back." The plan wasn't about shouting or fighting. It wasn't about barking dogs or angry confrontations. It was about rules, the very thing Karen loved most. "Revenge by compliance," Mr. Patel said with a grin. "We follow every rule so perfectly, we drown her in her own paperwork." Mr. Lewis added, "We find loopholes, contradictions, all the little traps she set for us, and we turn them back on her." Even Mrs. Lee smiled for the first time. "She thinks she's the only one who can read those bylaws? She's wrong." I sat back in my chair. The fire inside me burned brighter, because this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours, for weeks. We worked in secret. Late-night meetings in living rooms, whispered conversations at mailboxes, hidden copies of HOA bylaws passed around like contraband. We studied every line, every clause, every ridiculous detail. And we found things, contradictions, errors, rules that Karen herself had broken without realizing it. Mr. Patel discovered that Karen's approved mailbox was actually an outdated model not listed in the new bylaws. Mrs. Williams found that Karen's own backyard shed violated height restrictions. And I found the biggest one of all. Karen had been living in the neighborhood for 7 years, but the bylaws required board members to renew eligibility after 5. She had never renewed. Karen, the queen of the HOA, wasn't even legally allowed to be president anymore the night we uncovered it. The room buzzed with energy. We weren't just victims anymore, we were warriors. And for the first time, Karen's empire looked fragile. But we knew we had to be careful, because Karen wasn't blind. She could feel the shift. Her eyes lingered on us longer at the mailbox. Her car slowed down when she passed our houses. Notes started showing up again, slipped under doors, taped to windows, always unsigned. But we knew who they came from. It was psychological warfare again. But this time, we weren't afraid. The real test came one Saturday afternoon. I was walking Max and Rex when I saw her on the sidewalk ahead. Karen, blazer buttoned tight, clipboard in hand, her smile painted on like a mask. She stopped me in the middle of the street. "You think you embarrassed me at the hearing?" she hissed. "But you don't understand. I am this neighborhood." Her voice cracked at the edges. Her hands trembled as she gripped her clipboard, and for the first time, I realized she wasn't just angry. She was scared. I leaned down and patted Rex's head. Then I looked her in the eye and said, "No, Karen, this neighborhood belongs to all of us." And I walked away, leaving her standing there, trembling in the sunlight. That night we met again. The group had grown. More neighbors joined. Word was spreading. People were tired of being silent. Mrs. Williams stood in the center of the room and said, "It's time. We take this to the board, and we take Karen down." The room erupted with agreement. Hands slapped against knees, voices rose, and for the first time, the HOA didn't feel like hers anymore. It felt like ours, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling. Karen wasn't finished. She wouldn't go quietly. She would fight. And when she fought dirty. I sat in my chair, Max and Rex at my feet, and I wondered what her next move would be, because if she couldn't win with rules, what would she do next? The decision was made. We were going public. No more whispers in living rooms. No more secret meetings at night. The neighbors were ready to fight. Mrs. Williams drafted the petition. Mr. Patel typed up every violation we uncovered. Mr. Lewis made copies of the bylaws with highlighted sections. And Mrs. Lee, quiet Mrs. Lee, volunteered to speak at the meeting for the first time. I saw real courage in their eyes. Not just fear of Karen, but the fire of people who had been pushed too far. The day of the board meeting, the clubhouse was packed. More neighbors than I had ever seen in one place. The air buzzed with tension. Kids fidgeted in the back rows. Adults whispered under their breath. Everyone waiting for the showdown. Karen sat at the front table, her blazer tighter than ever, her clipboard stacked with papers, her smile stretched so wide it looked painful. Mr. Green sat beside her, calm as always, his eyes scanning the room like a predator waiting to strike. Karen banged her little wooden gavel. "Order," she snapped. "This meeting will come to order." But her voice cracked at the edges. She could feel it. The room wasn't hers anymore. Mrs. Williams stood first, her voice steady, but her hands shook as she held the petition. "We, the homeowners of this community, are demanding accountability." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's smile faltered. Mr. Green leaned forward in his chair. Mrs. Williams continued, "For years we've lived under rules twisted beyond reason, fines that make no sense, threats that go too far." She held up the petition. "This is signed by 23 homeowners, and counting." The crowd murmured. Karen's cheeks flushed red. Her gavel slammed against the table. "Out of order!" she shrieked. "This is not on the agenda." But, and it was too late. The words were out, and once the truth is spoken, it can't be taken back. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Max and Rex sat obediently at my side. Their presence alone made people sit straighter. I spread Karen's old notes on the table again, her handwriting, her obsession, her claim that my house was community property. I read her own words aloud. Every neighbor heard them. Every neighbor saw the madness in black ink. Karen's voice wavered as she shouted back, "You're twisting my notes. You're making me look crazy." But no one needed my help for that. Her own words, her own actions, spoke louder than anything I could say. Then Mrs. Lee stood, her voice soft, but clear. "My son can't even park in front of our house because of you." The room went silent. Her hands trembled, but her chin lifted high. For years I stayed quiet. I thought it was easier that way, but not anymore. She looked Karen in the eye. "You don't control me. You don't control any of us." And for the first time, the quietest neighbor in the room became the loudest voice. The tension broke like glass. Neighbors began to clap. A few stood. Voices rose all around me. It wasn't just anger. It was relief. Relief that someone had finally said what they were all afraid to say. Karen slammed her gavel again and again, her face twisted with fury. "Order! Sit down! You will respect this board." But no one listened. The power she had held for years was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. That's when Mr. Green spoke, his voice low. calm, but dangerous. If you believe you found violations, submit them formally. His eyes locked on me. Otherwise, this is nothing more than chaos. The room grew quiet again, because Mr. Green wasn't like Karen. He didn't scream. He didn't break. He knew how to play the long game. And I knew. He was the one I had to watch now. The meeting ended in shouting, neighbors on their feet, Karen red-faced and trembling, Mr. Greenstone silent, as I walked out of the clubhouse with Max and Rex. I felt the weight of what we had started. We weren't just fighting an HOA anymore. We were fighting people who would do anything to hold on to power. That night my porch light flickered twice, then went out. The bulb was new. The wiring was fine. But the light was dead. I looked out into the dark street. Shadows clung to the edges of lawns. A car engine started somewhere down the block, then faded into the night. It was a message. I knew it. Karen was angry, desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. The next morning, I found spray paint on my mailbox. The words, "Dangerous dogs," scrawled in red. Max barked when he saw it. Rex growled low, and my chest tightened. It wasn't just about fines anymore. It wasn't about bylaws. This was personal. I scrubbed the paint off with shaking hands, and I swore to myself, if they wanted war, they were going to get it. At the next secret meeting, the neighbors were buzzing. More people had joined. More stories came out. Stories of fines that made no sense, threats that felt like blackmail, and everyone had the same look in their eyes. They were tired, they were angry, and they were ready. We decided the next step, a formal motion to remove Karen from the board. Legally, publicly, no more whispers. The petition was growing, signatures stacked higher every day, and soon, the board would have to face it. But even as we planned, I couldn't shake the unease in my chest, because Karen wasn't backing down, and Mr. Green, he hadn't made his move yet. He was waiting, watching, and I knew when he finally struck, it would cut deeper than anything Karen had ever done the night before we planned to deliver the petition. I heard something outside, a creak, a shuffle of feet on the porch. Max growled. Rex stood rigid at the door. I grabbed the handle, yanked it open. And there it was, an envelope, plain white, sitting in the middle of my porch. I picked it up slowly. The paper was cold in my hand. Inside was one line written in sharp black ink. Back down, or next time, it won't just be your mailbox. My blood ran cold. I looked into the shadows of the street, but no one was there. Max barked into the night. Rex's teeth flashed in the porch light, and I realized this fight had just reached a new level. The note sat heavy in my hand. Back down, or next time, it won't just be your mailbox. I read it 3 times. Each word cut deeper than the last. It wasn't about rules anymore. It wasn't even about power. It was about fear. They wanted me to be afraid. They wanted me to fold. But fear is funny. Sometimes it makes you run, and sometimes it makes you fight harder. Max paced the porch. Rex sniffed the air, ears sharp, muscles tense. They knew something was wrong. They felt it the way animals do, that deep instinct when danger is close. I crumpled the note in my fist, and I swore out loud. They want a war. They'll get one. The next morning I went door to door with Mrs. Williams. We carried the petition. We gathered the last signatures. Every neighbor we visited had a story. Every neighbor had scars. One man showed us photos of fines stacked a foot high. Another woman cried as she described how Karen threatened to take her garden down. They signed quickly. Not just names on paper, but anger turned into ink. By noon, the petition was complete, more than enough to call for Karen's removal. And when we met back at Mrs. Williams' house, there was electricity in the air. The rebellion wasn't a secret anymore. It was a movement. But Karen must have felt it too, because that night, she struck back. It was after midnight. I was half asleep when Max barked. Rex growled deep, like thunder rolling in his chest. I jolted awake. There was a sound outside, a scrape against the side of the house, then a thud, then silence. I grabbed a flashlight, opened the back door slowly. The beam cut through the dark, and I saw it, spray paint across my fence. Huge black letters dripping down the wood. Dangerous dogs. Remove them or else. My chest tightened. It wasn't just vandalism. It was a warning, A promise that this wouldn't stop until I gave in. Max snarled. Rex barked so loud the whole street must have heard. But no one came out, no one peeked from their windows. It was like the whole neighborhood held its breath. I stood there in the cold night air, spray paint glistening under the flashlight. And I realized, this wasn't just Karen anymore. This was Mr. Green. This was strategy, terror in the dark, threats written in paint instead of paper. The next day, the neighbors gathered again, when they saw the fence. Whispers rippled through the group. Mrs. Williams clenched her fists. Mr. Patel shook his head, and Mrs. Lee whispered, "This has gone too far." We decided to move faster. The petition had to be delivered now, not next week, not at the next meeting, now. So we marched to the clubhouse as a group, dozens of neighbors walking side by side, the air heavy with tension, like soldiers heading into battle. Karen was there, clipboard in hand, her smile brittle, her eyes darting nervously as we filled the room. Mr. Green sat beside her as always, calm, cold, watching. Mrs. Williams stepped forward and slammed the petition on the table. "This is signed by the majority of homeowners," she said. "We are calling for your removal, effective immediately." The room erupted in murmurs. Karen's face went pale. She slammed her gavel. "You can't do this," she screamed. "I am the HOA president." Her voice cracked. Her hands shook for the first time. She looked small, but Mr. Green leaned forward, his voice smooth, cutting through the noise. "According to procedure, petitions must be verified, signatures checked, bylaws followed. Until then, she remains in power." The room quieted, because he was right. He knew the rules better than anyone, and he knew how to use them to stall us. Karen's smile twitched back onto her face. She clung to it like a lifeline. And I realized, Mr. Green wasn't her sidekick. He was the one pulling the strings now. That night I couldn't sleep. Again. Every creak in the house felt like footsteps. Every shadow outside looked like someone waiting. Max and Rex stayed alert, growling at the windows, pacing the doors. At 3 a.m. I heard something. A knock, not loud, just 3 soft taps at the back door. I froze, my heart pounded. I gripped the flashlight tight and whispered to the dogs, "Stay." I moved slowly, step by step, until I reached the door. I shined the light through the glass. Nothing, just the empty yard. I waited. The silence pressed in. Then, another 3 taps. But this time, from the side of the house, I spun the light. Still nothing. No footsteps. No shadows, just the sound of my own breath. Max barked. Rex lunged toward the door. But there was nothing there. They were playing games with me, breaking me down night by night, trying to make me snap. By morning, I felt like I hadn't slept in weeks. My hands shook as I poured coffee. Max and Rex hovered at my side, and I knew I couldn't keep waiting for their next move. I had to strike first. I called the group together. We gathered in Mrs. Williams' house again, and I laid it all out. The notes, the spray paint, the knocks in the night. Their faces hardened, fear mixed with anger. And finally, Mr. Patel said, "Then we expose them. All of it. In front of everyone." We made a plan. A neighborhood assembly. Not just a board meeting, not just a petition, but the whole community in one place, where we'd put everything on the table and force the board to answer. The night of the assembly, the clubhouse was overflowing, standing room only. People crammed into the back, voices buzzing with anticipation. Karen sat at the front table, her blazer pressed so tight she looked like she couldn't breathe. Mr. Green sat beside her, calm, unreadable. His eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Mrs. Williams stood first. She held up the petition, read the signatures out loud. The crowd cheered. Then I stepped forward. I laid out every note, every violation, every twisted word Karen had written, and then I pulled out the photos of my fence. The room gasped. Voices rose in outrage. Even the board members shifted uncomfortably. Karen's face turned red. She slammed her gavel so hard the handle snapped. "You're lying," she screamed. "You planted that yourself." But no one believed her anymore. Her voice was lost under the roar of the crowd. That's when Mr. Green finally spoke, his voice calm, measured, chilling. "You think you've won," he said, "but you've only started a war you can't finish." His words cut through the chaos, and the room went still, because we all knew he meant it. That night as I walked home with Max and Rex, the air felt heavier than ever. Yes, we had exposed Karen. Yes, the neighbors were on our side now, but Mr. Green was still there, and he wasn't done. As I locked my door and turned out the lights, I couldn't shake the thought. What would he do next? How far would he go to keep control? The night after the assembly, the street felt different. The neighbors weren't whispering anymore. They were talking, openly, loudly, for the first time. Karen wasn't feared. She was mocked. Her name floated across lawns like a bad joke, and every laugh chipped away at the power she once held. But Mr. Green, he didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look shaken, and that scared me more than anything. Because when people get loud, you can see their weakness. But when someone stays calm, when someone smiles while the world crumbles around them, that's when you know they're planning something darker. 2 nights later, I found another note, not taped to my door, not on my porch, slipped into my mailbox this time. Sharp black ink, a single line. Control is not given. It is taken. No threats, no names, just a statement. But I knew whose hand had written it. Mr. Green. The next day, rumors spread like wildfire. Karen wasn't at her house. Her car sat in the driveway, but she hadn't been seen. Some said she was sick. Others said she was hiding. A few even whispered she had skipped town out of shame. But I didn't believe it. Karen wasn't the type to run. She was the type to fight until her last breath. And if she wasn't showing her face, it meant she was plotting. Then Saturday came. The HOA called for an emergency session. No agenda listed, no explanation, just an order to attend. The clubhouse was packed again. Tension buzzed in the air like static before a storm. Karen sat at the center of the table, her hair a mess, her blazer wrinkled, her smile gone, and beside her, Mr. Green, perfect suit, cold eyes, that calm, terrifying calm. Karen slammed the gavel weakly. "This meeting is called to order." Her voice cracked. She looked like a puppet with broken strings. Then Mr. Green stood, and the air in the room shifted. He spoke slowly, every word deliberate. "There has been talk of rebellion, accusations, disrespect against this board." His eyes swept the room. "But order will be restored." He held up a thick stack of papers. New amendments, effective immediately. The room gasped. He was changing the rules on the spot. No votes, no debate, just declarations. One by one he read them aloud. Mandatory approval for pets larger than 20 pounds. Mandatory approval for gatherings of more than 4 people. Mandatory inspections of all homes once per quarter. Each rule more outrageous than the last. Each one aimed directly at us, at me, at Max and Rex. Neighbors shouted, voices rose, the room boiled with anger, but Mr. Green never raised his voice. He stood still, calm, smiling faintly as the chaos grew, because that's what he wanted. Chaos, fear, confusion, finally. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I stood. Max barked once. Rex growled low. "Enough," I said, loud, clear, strong. The room went quiet. Dozens of eyes turned to me. Karen's lips trembled. Mr. Green's smile widened. "You don't get to make the rules alone," I said. "This neighborhood doesn't belong to you." I reached into my folder and pulled out the papers we'd been saving, the clause from the bylaws, the one Karen had ignored for years, the one that stripped her of her power. I read it aloud. Board members must renew eligibility every 5 years. Failure to renew renders their position invalid. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face went pale. Her hands shook as she gripped the gavel. And then, the final blow. She hasn't renewed once in 7 years. The room exploded, voices shouting, neighbors on their feet, the air thick with outrage. Karen tried to speak. Her words drowned in the roar of the crowd, and for the first time, she looked defeated. But Mr. Green didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his smile never fading, and he whispered so only I could hear. "Even if she falls, I will still be here." The word sent a chill down my spine, because I knew he meant it. Karen was the face, but he was the power behind it, and power doesn't disappear. It shifts, it waits, it grows in the shadows. By the end of the meeting, Karen was gone. Neighbors cheered, they hugged, they clapped me on the back. Mrs. Williams whispered, "We did it." Mr. Patel laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. Even Mrs. Lee smiled. The rebellion had worked. The queen had fallen. But as I walked home with Max and Rex at my side, my chest felt heavy because Karen was finished. But Mr. Green was still out there, and he wasn't smiling for nothing. That night the neighborhood was alive with celebration. Porches lit up. Laughter carried on the breeze. For once the cul-de-sac felt like freedom, but I sat on my porch in the dark. Max stretched at my feet, Rex's head on my knee, and I stared at the shadows at the end of the street. Because I knew the story wasn't over. The face of the enemy had changed, but the war for control had only just begun. And now I want to ask you, do you think Karen was the real villain all along? Or was she just the mask hiding someone far worse like Mr. Green? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know who you think the true enemy of this neighborhood really is.